Hi, my name's Jeremy, and this is my Nissan Figaro.
Here we are in the beautiful Rhine River Valley where we brought our Figaro for a shakedown cruise. I love my little Figaro. It's like an Italian sports car. If there's one thing that I don't like about my Figaro, it's the automatic transmission.
Around town and through the villages, it's perfectly adequate.
But if you get out on the highway and you're asked to do 130 kph, the engine has to rev really high, and it doesn't like to do that for hours on end. But there is a fix for that.
Using various bits from a Micra, you can convert your Figaro to 5-speed manual transmission.
It's a no-cut process. It is pretty easy to do, and it really transforms the way the car drives. Doing the swap will also allow you to keep the engine in the range of RPM where the turbo's the happiest and making the most power, which makes the entire driving experience more sporty and responsive. When you are manual swapping a Figaro, you're going to need a few things from your donor Micra. Here's a bunch of that stuff. You're going to need the shifter assembly. You're going to need the clutch and flywheel. You're going to need the spacer plate. You're going to need the entire pedal box. Some axles. The manual axles are different. All the mounts for the transmission, because obviously they're different. You're going to need a new speedometer cable and clutch cable, of course. All of the bolts that attach the transmission and the various brackets. Couple of extra little braces and things that have to go in, and the transmission itself. So I'm going to start on the inside of the car for this conversion while I'm still clean and I don't have grease all over me. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pedal box out. The pedal box is held in place by 4 studs with nuts on them. Here's 2 of them here. And then at the top of the pedal for the gas, there's a little plastic grommet. And then on the brake pedal, see if I can get it to focus, there's a clip right here. I'm going to pop that clip off and then slide this rod off. That'll allow me to take it out. Gotta disconnect the brake switch. First things first, let's get this shield off the lower part of the steering column. There's just some Phillips screws holding it on. And then around the key, there's a little bezel that just pops off. And then we can take this off. Right. And wiggle that out. Ta-da! Now you can really see what's going on. So the lower steering column is held onto the pedal box by a couple of bolts down here. That's why I took that thing off, so I could get to it. I've decided that I have to drop the steering column completely down to get to one of the top left side bolts. So I have 2 bolts that hold it to the pedal bracket there that I've taken out. But there's 2 more that hold it to the dash there. Let's see if I can get a good shot of it. You know, you get your steering column lock here. Right behind it, underneath here, there are 1 here and 1 on the other side that hold it to the dash, and that should allow the steering column to drop down out of the way. Interestingly, it looks like they were planning on having the Figaro use tilt steering, because that's what this is. There would have been a bolt that goes through here, and then like a clamp on one side and a big hand wheel on the other, so you loosen it up and then you could tip the steering wheel up and down to change the angle. But I guess they just gave up on it at the last minute, or maybe this is part spin engineering and this is for a different car, because they just welded it solid into place. All right, I've got the 4 bolts out of the firewall now, and I found 2 more, and they are hidden behind the brake light switch right there in the bottom of the dash. So to get the pedal box out, I have to take those 2 guys out too. This is the air box for the air conditioning, the brake light switch, 2 bolts straight up. I'm lying on my back, and as you can see, there's the brake pedal rod and the 4 bolts that hold the box to the wall. So let's get those out. Got one already out. Get one more out, and I might have to take the brake light switch out to do it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the throttle cable off. First thing I'm going to need to do that is block the throttle wide open. So let's go under the hood and do that. This is the engine bay. There's the throttle cable, and there's the throttle. If I pull the cable, you can see the throttle opens. So I'm going to block the throttle completely open by clipping onto that little tab there with a pair of vice grips. Now that I've got some looseness, some gap on the throttle cable, let's see, I can just wiggle it, and then I can get the little grommet out of the end of the cable, and that'll allow me to slide the cable out. Pressing on the back of the grommet allowed me to get the cable loose, and then there's a slot in the top of the pedal. Let's see if I can get in there. There's a slot on the top to let the cable come out once you push the grommet through the little hole there. There we are. Okay, so the pin has a little plastic doodad on the end of it so that it's not easy to fall out. Even if the little cotter pin falls out of here, it's got this little plastic thing to hold it in place, and you have to squeeze those little tabs in to shove it out of the hole and get the brake rod off. It's pretty nifty. Now that that's out, the brake is no longer connected to the rod, and so it can't push the brakes anymore. All right, the brake light switch is now disconnected. The brake pedal rod is disconnected. The throttle is disconnected. There's a little bracket right there that holds like a warning buzzer or something. It's back here. So I'm gonna take that out. And then the 4 bolts that hold the thing to the wall, and we're done. We got the box out. All right, I've got the 2 boxes side by side now, and you can see that they're nearly identical, except for the 3rd pedal, which is the bit we all need. And honestly, looking at it now, I don't think you actually need to swap the entire box. As a matter of fact, it might be beneficial not to. I think I can take the cross shaft out of it and transfer it into this box, because the molding is almost the same, but it does have this extra little bit here. Yep, can confirm that the pin from the old pedal box will just slide into the existing Figaro box. And there was a bracket bolted here with a buzzer on it, so I'll have to relocate that. But this is the stopper now for the clutch pedal, but it's exactly the same. It's even got the hole in it for the spring, like already there. It just all bolts right together, no problems. So now I just have to reverse everything I did to reinstall it. This shift solenoid controller was bolted to the steering column in the spot where the clutch pedal has to go. So I removed it, and apparently the car doesn't care because it starts just fine with it unplugged. This is the speedometer cable. And that's the end that goes in the speedometer head, and that's the end that screws into the transmission. And as you can see, there's a little push button thing to release it from the back of the speedometer. Okay, so I've made a mistake and now I have to pay for it. And I'm going to tell you about it now so that you don't make the same mistake. When you have the steering column apart and you're putting the pedal box in, take the time to disconnect the speedometer cable and install the new cable. Even if you have to drive it somewhere and install the transmission somewhere else, while you have it all apart, do the cable and just leave it in the engine bay so that it's ready to plug into your new transmission. Because now I have to take all of that apart again. Okay, after you button up the pedal box and you get it all back together, you're probably wondering where the clutch cable goes. Well, there's a hole in the firewall, right here, next to the brake booster. Here's the master and everything, in the brake booster. And there's a hole right here, and it had this rubber plug in it, like so. You know, and here's the here's the spot where it comes out. It comes right out of the firewall, right there. So this is just a leftover vestige from when it was a Micra. Yeah, so everything's already there for you, no drilling required. This is the clutch cable. This end goes through the firewall, through that rubber plug that we just took out, and this end here connects onto the pedal, and this end goes to the transmission, and there's the adjuster to take up the slack in the clutch. Before I go lifting the car in the air, I'm going to take the center console out. Inside the glove box area, inside this little console box area, there's 2 screws in the bottom, and there should be 2 more underneath the cigarette lighter ashtray combo thing here. That way I can unbolt the shifter and make sure that's loose before I lift the car. There's 4 screws that hold the shifter assembly down. I'm going to take all those out next. Okay, now that I got the shifter loose, you can see, wiggle it all around, it's fine. The cable's still holding it in, of course, but once I get the transmission out, I'll be able to unhook it and remove this. Well, this is how the engine bay looks. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the bat tray. First thing to do whenever you start working on the car, disconnect the battery, and then I'm going to take the wheels off. Okay, now I'm going to disconnect the starter and take the starter motor out. All I did here was take the airbox out of the way so I can see what I was doing inside here. Once you've got the hubcap off, 4 bolts, take the cotter pin out, take the dust cap off and the crown cap off, and then take the center nut off of the CV axle. Now that I got the wheel off, I'm going to take the 2 bolts out of the strut, and that'll allow me to get the knuckle loose and get the axle out from inside the end of the hub. 17 millimeter. Ended up having to take the tie rod off to get enough room to get the axle out. But once the axle's popped out of the hole, it's just hanging there. I can pop it out of the other side of the transmission once I get it drained out. So now I'm gonna raise it up and drain the transmission and pop the axles completely off. In the left side wheel well, there's a big plastic shield, and that's the transmission underneath it. So I'm gonna take this shield out so I can get a ratchet in there to get the bolts on this left side, and there's a motor mount on the back, or a transmission mount on the back behind this shield. So that's next. I'm gonna show you where the cooler lines are. There's one there, and there's the other one. And we're gonna disconnect those and drain the transmission out. I might even take the pan off to drain the rest of the oil out of the transmission. And while I'm doing that, when I'm done doing that, I'm going to come over here and put some WD-40 on this guy, because this little support is going to be rusty as hell because it's on the exhaust. So I'm going to put some lube there, and then if I still have time before that's draining, while it's draining, I'm going to get the shifter disconnected here from this cotter pin and take the bracket off, because I won't need any of this cable anymore. This is all going away. Now that I've got easy access to the pan, I'm just going to drain the pan out. Otherwise, I'm going to have transmission fluid in my face the whole time I'm trying to take the transmission out of the car, because when you go to tip it, it's going to run out of the axle holes. Close that off, get that good. All right. It's loose now. And then 2 10mm. we go. Nice. Just keep taking things apart. Eventually it'll fall out on its own. That's the theory. Like that. Get him behind him. Pop free. Get a little bit of drip out of it. And axle's free. All right. How does that wiggle out of that hole? Maybe I should have taken more of it apart first. Come on. Ooh, got a power steering leak. Check that out. I have to get that fixed. Out she comes. All right, so I'm back on the driver's side of the car now, and I have to look through that hole back there. Now that I've got the motor mount out of the way. I don't know if I'm even getting that in shot, but we'll see. Got the CV axle out. See that hole? You see that bolt? That's the bolts that hold the torque converter on. So I got to turn the motor over using the 19 millimeter here until the bolt becomes visible, and then you take the bolts out. And I think there's 3 of them. Line it up. And there she is, right there. I've got the motor mounts out, and I loosened the torque converter. I've got one bolt right here that's holding the transmission to the block, and then I've got a motor mount up here that you can just barely see. Can I get the camera in there? Let's see. Let's see if I can get it better this way. Yeah, see? There's a bolt right there. Take that out, put it on the transmission jack. It's out of the car. Come on, wiggle free. Down. All right. There we go. Nice and gentle. All the bits. Okay, these are the flex plate bolts, and these are the flywheel bolts for the manual transmission. And you will note that they are longer, so don't try to reuse the automatic transmission. Make sure you get the bolts for the manual transmission flywheel, not the flex plate. Okay, offer up your new dust shield. Goes on like so. And then offer up your flywheel and bolt it on. Easy squeezy. Goes on like that. Something that had me twisted for a moment was fitting the flywheel on, and it was because I had failed to take this stupid spacer off. These spacers for the automatic only, and it moves the flex plate so it's in the right position, but you don't need it. It just pops off the end of the crank. It's just not even a press fit, it's just sitting on there. So once you get that done, you can put your separator plate, flywheel, bolt it all up, torque it to spec. The first thing we're going to talk about are the brackets that have to go onto the transmission. This one is the clutch cable mount, and it's mounted with these 8mm by 10mm bolts right here next to where the starter hole goes. It goes in these 2 little holes here. And that's how it mounts on there. And there's the bolts. And the next thing is this torque arm, and it mounts with these 10mm bolts, and they're about 17, maybe 20. And it bolts to these 3 holes on the side of the transmission underneath the clutch fork arm. And there it is, all mounted up. And the next thing I'm going to do is put the new clutch throwout bearing in. This is the throwout bearing. If you're going to go all the way to replacing the clutch, you might as well get a new throwout bearing. Don't reuse the old one. Anyway, the new throwout bearing does not come with these little clips on the side. You're going to need to recycle those off of your old throwout bearing. Anyway, it slips onto there. The little forks on there go inside the clips, and then the whole thing slides together. Move the clutch lever all the way out, put the bearing onto the little forks, and then wiggle the bearing until it slides back onto the shaft. And as you can see, the fork is now retained by that clip that you recycled, and it can move backwards and forwards. So I'm going to wipe this off, all the excess grease. Got to leave some on there so that the bearing can slide forward and back, but I don't need that much. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is this bad boy. Big chunk of steel. It's held on with 2 of these 10 by 105 millimeter and a single 10 by 25 millimeter, and it goes into these 3 holes and then through these 3. There's one more up here on the... All right, and that is it bolted in place in those 3 holes. And I think that it actually can't go in until you have it in the engine bay, because the engine block probably goes in this gap here. I'll figure that out in a minute. Okay, and then there's this bracket, right? That little guy there, here, and it drops into this slot. And you can see there's little notches in it. This one's pretty knackered, but it's got little tabs on the edge of the hole, and it drops into place like that. And it looks... So I'm getting progressively dirtier, but now that the old one's out, the new one is just reverse everything that you did and put it back. You know, put the braces back on, use the new mount because it's got a little slightly different shape to it. You know, put the axles in, yada yada. Basically all just reversing what you already done. On the transmission, there's the shifter bit. Let's see. Here's the yoke for the end of the shifter, and the support goes here through this hole, and it uses this unusual bolt that has a lot of shank on it and not a lot of thread. It goes in here like so, and you screw it in. And there's the end, and then the yoke. Okay, let's talk about the shifter assembly. This is the mount for the shifter. There's one on each side of the little brackety bit, and there's holes already in the body for it. You can see these holes here? These holes? Oh wait, I guess you can't see. Let me try to get a finger in there. Let's see. Hole, there we go. See that hole? There's one, and there's one in front of it, and there's one on each side, and goes through this bracket, and then that goes up into place like that, and that bolts in like that, and then your shifter's mounted. All right, that's the shifter installed with new bushes. We're going to talk about the neutral safety system and how to defeat it, and also how to get your backup lights working when you do the manual swap. Off of the Micra stuff, and as you can see, it is not the same plug that the Figaro has on the automatic. They have 2 different shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an adapter to go from the Micra transmission
to the Figaro, and it's going to be here. By fooling around with this switch, this is just an arm switch, and it has two functions. When it's in park like that, it completes the circuit for the starter, so the starter will work. So we're going to short that together, and then when it's in reverse, it turns the reverse lights on. And that's what this plug is going to do. It's going to turn the reverse lights on, but it won't control the safety part. By fooling around with a meter, I figured out that the two colored wires are the reverse light switch, and the two black wires are the neutral safety. So I'm just gonna whip up a little adapter Rooney like that, and that'll solve that problem. Now the neutral safety system has been defeated and the car will start. Now I just have to splice in the other plug into these and I'll have reverse lights. Yes, I know. People out there are going to be like, you're not supposed to use butt connectors that way. That's the wrong way to do it. Look, you do it your way. I'm going to do it mine. And I'm pretty sure this is still going to work. Put some tape on it, nobody will ever see it. And yes, I could have cut the wiring harness on the Figaro and wired this plug directly into it and then spliced it at the car. But honestly, this is way simpler and easier. And I don't care if I ruin a neutral safety switch on a transmission that I am not going to be using anymore. Just like that. Put a little tape on it. Good as new.
It's a shakedown cruise to make sure that the transmission works properly. And I have to tell you, everything is wonderful here. You can do this conversion yourself at home on the ground with just jack stands and a jack. I used a vehicle lift because I wanted to be able to film it and show it to all of you. I'm sure it would be a much more hassle to do on the ground, but it can be done. If you wanted, you could go out and get a K10 and strip it yourself, or you could contact your local breakers and buy all of the parts that you needed. But you do not want to take the transmission out again because you put in a used box and it has a problem. I do not live in an area where K10 Micras were sold. A big thank you to the Figaro shop for supplying the parts I needed to make this conversion happen. They were extremely helpful and managed to answer all of my technical questions whenever I had any.
Now that I've done the conversion, when I get on the highway and I get it into fifth gear, I'm only doing 3,500 RPM to do 130 kph.
That's about 1,000 RPM less than the automatic transmission, which should really improve your engine life and the driving experience overall.
Thank you for watching this video. If you've noticed any mistakes I've made, please comment below. A complete parts list will be in the detailed description below.